Y'all, I am Carolyn Jardine. I'm with Conserve Utah Valley. I've been a volunteer since the very, very beginning of early days of Conserve Utah Valley. And we got our start in a whole bunch of residents coming together to very much focus on protecting Bridalveil Falls. And from there, we got involved in Utah Lake and making sure that we could protect Utah Lake from having any disruptive development that would bring islands to it, if you remember that. Effort that we've been very focused there. And we've also been very focused in staying engaged on conserving land and water throughout Utah Valley communities. And because a lot of our volunteers live in Provo, we tend to get very focused on some Provo issues. And so that brings us to where we are tonight. We are very happy to be here tonight with two super gracious guests from Provo City, Bill Peperone and Rachel Breen, who are here to help us understand some of the process around development and what it takes to get a development done in Provo City. Before we jump into our discussion with Rachel and Bill, oh darn it, my slide lost its cute image of downtown Provo, but I wanted to just make sure that everybody has a good understanding of why Conserve Utah Valley is hosting this tonight. We have a lot of growth happening. Things are changing really quickly. And the Provo that some of us grew up in, I mean, I've lived here. I remember my first grade experience at Canyon Crest Elementary was a long time ago, but some of us have seen a lot of phases of Provo, and we're very excited and enthusiastic about what future phases of Provo could look like. And it's important for us that as we are engaged residents of Provo, that we actually understand what the process and what some of the guardrails are that exist around the way that our city changes and develops over time. And one of the things that I have learned in being involved in the work that we do at Conserve Utah Valley is that I know almost nothing about the way things get done when it comes to city process or city procedure or county or government. And as I've gotten involved and cared about specific issues and started to dig in and peel back the layers of what the process looks like or how things make their way through, I have learned so much. And it is conversations like this that really give us the opportunity to understand why when you see something, an announcement that pops up, why maybe it's in the middle of a process when it feels like the beginning or it feels like the end, and actually it's the middle. And, Rachel and I were talking just before this call, and she said, the thing is how would people know? And so what we hope to achieve tonight is giving those of you who've joined and anybody who watches the recording afterward an opportunity to actually understand what the current process looks like and where there are opportunities for citizens of Provo and people who are interested in the things happening in Provo to engage, and where your efforts have the most impact. So that is our hope for our goal tonight. One of the things that I want you to understand is who we have joining us tonight. So we've got two guests. We've got Rachel Breen, who is our Community Relations Analyst for the City Council. Or anybody who's active on social media, I see Rachel's posts all the time, and I really appreciate, Rachel, your effort in helping to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit to help us understand process and help us understand what's going on. But you've been a resident of Provo for over, 39 years. That's amazing. And you're coordinating the neighborhood district program and helping to make sure people know how to engage with city council. We really appreciate you coming and spending your Monday night with us, Rachel. And then we've also got Bill Peperone, and Bill has been with Provo City for over 16 years, department head since 2018, and has a master's degree in urban planning, but also has a degree in political science and psychology from BYU. I guess those would be two separate degrees, huh, Bill? Not the same one. Political science and psychology in one would be an interesting degree. Maybe we should both go back for that. But you also bring a lot of municipal planning expertise across our entire region. So that is very fortunate for us to have you here as well, and really appreciate you being here and spending your Monday night with us. So Bill and Rachel, thank you so much. Before we get into your presentations tonight, I just want to kind of set the stage here. We have kind of rules of engagement for every town hall that we host. And it's been a little while since we hosted one, so I thought it would be worth just kind of covering the way that we do these things. At Conserve Utah Valley, we really believe in bringing people to the table to have discussion and to learn from each other. And so we don't end up leaving these things where we've, thrown barbs at each other or set, kind of booby traps for each other. Instead, this is really a place where we get to engage, we get to learn, and we get to have really good discussions that mean when we leave here, we all understand a little bit better what the future can look like and how we can be part of that. For tonight's discussion, we're going to focus specifically on Provo. So if you have questions about development in other cities, we're going to have to table that for another night with different guests because Rachel and Bill are experts on Provo. The other thing that we want to make sure that we think about is we're going to be talking about the process broadly. And we're all aware that the main reason for this push on understanding the process is because there is a big development that is being considered for Provo that is called the Vesper Amphitheater development. And we know that that's kind of the big instigator for this conversation. But what we're not here to discuss tonight is that specific development. There are a lot of places where you can learn about Vesper's plans, about what they are hoping to do with that development. Their website, Conserve Utah Valley, has a position paper on our website that you can go and learn more about our opinion about the development. That's not really tonight's focus. Tonight's focus is understanding the process, the procedure, what a developer would have to do to get a development in front of the city, and then what the public can do to engage on it. So when we open up for Q&A, just please keep that in mind. We're going to be pretty narrow in our focus. And if there are folks who start to, let's call it hijack the conversation, we will just go ahead and mute because we want to make sure we stay focused on that process. And like we said, there's plenty of other venues that you can ask questions about the developers and their specific plans. I do want to make sure, though, that you are aware that if you have a question about the process in relation to Vesper, those questions are on the table for tonight. So when we get there, we can make sure we're real clear on that. And then last but not least, we want to make sure that our questions are constructive. And if you can, make sure that they're targeted towards understanding city government and process so that we can get through as many questions as possible. I'm going to be watching the chat. So is Nick from Conserve Utah Valley. We'll be watching the chat and trying to raise the questions from the chat if you'd rather not ask your question live. If you would like to ask your question live when we get there, we'll talk about that, but we'll have you indicate that through the meeting tools. So when we get there, we'll come back and share the process for asking questions. Okay, enough housekeeping. I would love to open the stage up to our guests, Bill and Rachel. And Bill and Rachel are going to cover the Provo City development process. We're going to talk about proposal and reviews. We'll talk about public input. We'll talk about permits and utility and inspections. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward to the slide that you guys provided and turn the time over to Bill.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here with you tonight. Before I start in on these slides and the steps that we go through for development review, I want to talk about a meeting that we have as city staff that we hold every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. You might have heard of it or people refer to it. It's called the CRC meeting. CRC stands for Coordinators Review Committee. So that meeting involves about 20 members of city staff that have anything to do at all with development review. That meeting is every Wednesday morning. It starts at 9 o'clock and it goes for as long as that's needed. And we meet with citizens, we meet with developers, or we just meet as a staff to talk about development review and different projects that are at some point in the review process. The reason I bring that meeting up at the beginning is that developers or citizens can meet with that group, the CRC group, at any time during any of these stages, any of these steps. People can come in and talk to us. It's very frequent that we have developers that will come in before any application is made to the city. They just come in to say, hey, I'm thinking about putting townhomes on this piece of property. What are my obstacles to doing that? And they get told everything from zoning problems to infrastructure, public works problems. If a project just seems to be languishing in our process, they just don't seem to be making progress, we'll invite that developer in to that meeting to go through their project and what's going on and why aren't they making progress and getting something done. So these are the steps we go through with any project. And now every project doesn't apply to every step. Every project doesn't need a general plan amendment. Every project doesn't need a zone change, but these are the steps we go through depending on what apply. It's not just Provo, but it's in any city in Utah where the general plan doesn't have to be amended in order to change the zoning. In the state of Utah, because a general plan, step one, is an advisory document, to deviate from that, the city doesn't have to amend it. They can ignore it, they can follow it, they can amend it. They can do any of those things and it's legal. It's always been the practice in Provo City to amend the general plan if we're going to deviate from it. Okay. We have half a dozen neighborhood plans in the city. The neighborhood plans are part of the general plan, and the city council pays strict attention to those because those have gone through an exhaustive neighborhood process to get neighborhood buy-in. So it's rare for the city council to deviate from those neighborhood plans. The next step is the zone change. There is no vested right to a zone change. It's highly discretionary, up to the city council. They can deny a zone change for any number of reasons. After the zone change or accompanying the zone change is the concept plan. The concept plan is approved by the Planning Commission, not the city council. And that's just part of the zone change process because the Planning Commission and the city council want to see what the developer wants the zone change for. What is he trying to do? What's he trying to build? Those things that are typically included in a concept plan, conceptual architecture, location of parking, general landscaping, those land uses, those types of things on the concept plan, those are also the things that typically go into a development agreement. That's why a development agreement, if one is going to be used, it accompanies the zone change stage. All right. Concept plan is approved by the Planning Commission, but development agreement is approved by the city council. It's signed by the mayor, but it's a contract that's negotiated with the city council. Any commitments that a developer makes that cannot be backed up by the zoning ordinance, any promises they make that can't be enforced by the zoning ordinance, those are put into the development agreement, and then the city can enforce it because it's in a development agreement. Okay. The next project is the project plan review, and I think probably the general public doesn't understand how intensive the project plan review stage is. For a complex project, for them to get in front of the Planning Commission within 6 months is rare. For a complex project, 6 months to a year, working with staff and answering all of staff's questions and getting all the studies done and doing those things the studies say should be done, that takes a lot of time. And so this isn't a quick turnaround kind of thing. There's a lot of review and back and forth that goes during project plan review. There can be 3 or 4 or 5 submittals that go back and forth between the applicant and the staff during the project plan review stage. After that gets approved, it goes to the city council, or it goes to the Planning Commission. There's another public hearing at that point. The public is noticed, they can come in and have comments on that. After that's decided on, then they go back to the process again for final approval. The final approval is actual construction level drawings. So that's even more detailed engineering. That's sewer lines and water lines. What is the grade on the sewer line going to be? What's the grade on every road going to be? What's the cross section of the streets? What's the asphalt width and sub-base width? All of that is part of the final project plan. So those construction drawings are very exhaustive. Okay. The building permit would be applied for probably during the final approval stage. And again, the building permit, that's pages and pages and pages of construction plans for every building on the site. With the final plat, in order to record the final plat, you have to post bonds. The developer has to post bonds for all the construction that's going to take place: curbs and gutters, road improvements, water lines and sewer lines, parking lots, parking lot landscaping. Bonds have to be posted for all of that construction. So if a project starts and then the developer runs out of money, the city has the money to go in and finish the project. Okay. You probably remember years ago a project on the Orem Hill, that Midtown Village that was sat there in half-built condition for years and years. The purpose of the bonds is to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay.
Bill, I have a couple questions. Is now a good time to ask
Sure.
clarifying questions? Okay.
Sure.
So let me just make sure I understand. You were saying for general plan amendment, if necessary, we're talking about the general plan and neighborhood plans. Just to make it clear, those general plans and the neighborhood plans, we're not obligated for the city to follow those, but in Provo, you generally do. Am I understanding that correctly? It's not illegal to do something that deviates from the plan, but in Provo, we customarily do follow it. Is that
Yes, well, especially with the neighborhood plans. Like I said, we don't have a neighborhood plan for every neighborhood in Provo, but the neighborhood plans have gone through such an exhaustive process with the neighborhood to get neighborhood buy-in that the city council seems to be especially hesitant to deviate from a neighborhood plan. There is a neighborhood plan for Northeast that was very recently approved. But again, the city council can follow it or not follow it. It's discretionary.
okay? That's a good clarification. And then the other question I have is we're going through this process and it looks sequential, like you would start with general plan amendment if necessary, then go to a zone change and then concept plan. It might be my perception of this and maybe other people's perception, but it feels like with the Vesper project that maybe this order has been a little different. But that could just be a perception. So I'd love to hear from your perspective. Like, I know it hasn't yet gone in front of the city council for zone change, but it has been before the planning commission.
Yes.
So how do we understand the way that it's working itself through?
So this exact process is what Vesper has followed. When it went to planning commission, the three applications were in front of them. Well, then in the Vesper case, also the development agreement. The planning commission ruled on the general plan amendment, and they sent a recommendation on that. And then they ruled on the zone change and made a recommendation on that. They didn't need to deny the concept plan. I think they did. I think they actually made a motion to deny, but they didn't need to because no, I may have that backwards. They may not have made a motion on the concept plan because the zone change had been denied. So there was no reason to make a finding on the concept plan. The development agreement went to planning commission because there were cases in the SC3 zone where they deviated from the zone. So the planning commission needed to weigh in on those situations where they deviated from the SC3 zone. So all four of those applications did go to the planning commission, and planning commission deliberated on every one of those.
Okay. But it's not necessarily like 1, 2, 3, 4, like these are the steps that they have to go through, but they're bringing it back to planning commission. Then maybe all of this comes back to the city council.
Right. In planning commission, they tend to discuss all of them at once because we learned years ago that it's very hard when you have the public to show up to speak. It's hard to just hear the general plan amendment first and tell the public only if you have a comment on the general plan, come up and speak, because the public will tend to get up and want to talk about the concept plan and objections they have to that. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to separate all that out. So the planning commission tends to read in all the applications at the same time, and they take public input on all the applications, and then they deliberate on all the applications, but then they make separate motions on each one. And that's exactly what happened in the case of Vesper.
Okay. That's great. I have a couple more questions, and a couple have come in through the chat that I think that the timing is good because you're talking about this process right now.
I apologize if that seems confusing when it's in front of the planning commission.
No, that's making sense. And that's why I asked, because if you're just reading the slide, you're like one, two, three, but it's actually a little bit more nuanced than just, it doesn't go
Right,
straight all the way one to the end.
right.
It kind of comes back and forth. That makes sense. Um, so in the chat, there's a couple of really good questions that are very aligned to a couple more that I wanted to ask. One is coming from Julie. She's wondering in this process and the kind of order of things, at what point do you start briefing the mayor or city council on plans that a developer is coming up with? Do all development plans kind of get briefed before they come before planning commission or city council? Or, at what point would you kind of raise a project up?
Well, I meet with the mayor almost weekly. And one of the things that I meet with her about is to talk about anything that's coming down the pike, anything that's coming through our process that may be of more importance, maybe more controversial, maybe something she needs to know about because she may start getting questions from the public about it. So, and that's just kind of up to me what rises to that level to raise the issue to the mayor. But so no, every project does not get discussed with the mayor ahead of time, but those that I deem to be either larger or potentially more controversial, I will bring up to the mayor. And it's an FYI kind of thing. Hey, just be aware, this is where the property is. This is what's being proposed or discussed. And it's that type of discussion.
That makes sense. Okay, I'm going to ask two more questions and I'm going to let you get back to what the material that you were wanting to share. The first one is actually goes back to the word material. Mark's asking, you had mentioned earlier that sometimes if there's a change to plans, whether it's a material or a non-material change, that is there a legal definition for those two terms with the city? How do you determine what the difference is between material and non-material changes?
Well, in the case of Vesper, we've tried to define that in the development agreement. So there's actually more language on that issue in the development agreement than we've had in the past. Typically, in the development agreement, it simply says if there's a significant change, and it's actually just up to the staff as to what would qualify as significant. So if they're changing the color of the building or minor modifications to the materials, we consider that to be insignificant. If they're relocating things on site, all of a sudden they're changing the location of parking, they're changing the location of buildings, they're changing heights of buildings or density, housing density. All of those things would be considered significant, but that's how we've done it in the past. It's simply not material or non-material. It's significant or insignificant, and that's left up to staff. But again, because this project has had so much scrutiny and there's such a desire to get it right that there's been more definition on that issue in the development agreement than ever before.
In the spirit of kind of like the getting it right, when you're looking at projects as they're going through the process that, goes ahead of planning commission, comes back to city council, all of these things are being considered. Once a project gets going, is there a point of no return? I know that's kind of a big question, but is there a point where, you know, the developers are off and running and we don't have as much control, or where do the controls really come in to make sure that what has been agreed to is actually what ends up happening?
Um, well, I guess that would depend on, who you want to have control. So during those first stages, 1 through 4, that's where the city council is involved. Once those decisions are made, all the other approvals are administrative, whether it's a planning commission approval like site plan, or whether it's final approval, which is up to staff. 5, 6, 7, and 8, those are administrative approvals. Um, the staff tries to be very careful to make sure that what is in the development agreement is followed, that commitments that have been made are followed. Um, we spend a lot of time working with the developer to make sure that the expectations they raised are followed and delivered on. That's kind of the point of the development agreement and, any other documents that we have that would go along with that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I want you to be able to get back to your material and Rachel to get onto her. So I'm going to stop asking questions, but I appreciate you letting me interject.
I think I was pretty much done. So with the final plat, like I was saying, bonds have to be posted. In the case of Vesper, We will have them do a 2-lot plat. The city's property will be one lot. The gravel pit will be the other. And that's because, as you've heard it discussed, and as is in the development agreement, if at some point certain triggers aren't met and the city is going to take back the city's property, we want a distinct parcel created that makes it easy for us to legally reassume that property. So that's how the plat will be designed. Building permits, again, those are just for the actual structures on the site. And that right there will take 6 or 8 weeks for them to get through the building permit process and satisfy the building inspectors that everything's been done to code. So that's all I have. I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Bill. Rachel.
Okay. So my emphasis is going to be on how residents can have their voice heard in the development process. I am not a development process expert. I'm more dealing with the public. And so I help with the neighborhood district program. Provo City has 35 neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has 2 representatives. It's someone who's very interested in development, very interested in their community. They're volunteers, and they kind of represent their neighborhood. And so when someone submits a planning application, these neighborhood representatives are one of the first people to know about it. They are alerted usually just a few days to a week after the person applies. And so that neighborhood representative gets a heads up. And sometimes they're like, oh, okay, that person is just redesigning their garage, not a big deal. But other times it's something big, and zone changes are always big because that's something that can change your neighborhood for years on end. You know, it's going from a single family home to a big apartment building, that's going to change your neighborhood. And so the neighborhood representatives are alerted right away. And then we usually try to the groups of neighborhoods are grouped into districts, and we have district meetings. And so if it is a bigger project like a general plan amendment or a zone change, something like that, something that's going to go to Planning Commission and City Council, then we invite the developer to attend a neighborhood district meeting. And we have the developer come, he explains or she explains their project, and then we open it up for questions. It's very informal, and it's a great opportunity for residents to speak directly to the developer. And it's a two-way conversation in that residents can say, ooh, I don't really like that, or I'm nervous about that, or I really like this idea, or and so they can kind of ask for people's opinions. And then at the neighborhood district meetings, it's informational. It's so the residents can know about a project early in the process, and then it's on their mind. So then when it does go to Planning Commission and City Council, they're like, oh yeah, I heard about that at that neighborhood meeting. And then they can be more involved and attend these public hearings. So the Planning Commission meetings go first, and those are open to the public, and the public can come and speak. You have 2 minutes. And so I always tell people, write down what you want to say and time yourself saying it so you can have your voice heard at the meeting. If you cannot attend the meeting, you can email the Planning Commission, and they do read their emails. And I always try to emphasize, be as specific as possible. Don't just say, I don't want my neighborhood to change. I don't, be very specific, this, because of this infrastructure, because of the traffic on this intersection, things like that. And I know that the planning commissioners, they take those emails and they actually go out to the property and kind of look and go, oh, they're right. There is kind of a dicey intersection here. I might think about it. They do read this input that you have. And then the Planning Commission for general plan amendment, zone changes, they make a recommendation. For example, I'm just bringing it up from Vesper, since that was a recent one. The Planning Commission voted 5-2 to recommend that the City Council deny the general plan amendment, and they voted 5-2 to recommend that the City Council deny the zone change, and they voted 7-0 to deny the concept plan. Now, when they're making recommendations, they're not making the final decision on the general plan amendment and the zone change. Those then go to the City Council. So the public has another chance to speak at a public hearing, or they can email the City Council. And the City Council does read the emails, and they reply to almost every single one of them. And then you have another chance, again, the 2-minute time to talk, and the City Council are the ones who make the final decision for the general plan amendments and the zone changes. So for the public, first their neighborhood chairs. Oh, someone's saying I'm sorry, I'm going by saying there was a sorry, comment was saying that my information was wrong on that. But so you have like your neighborhood representatives hear about the project. You can go to a neighborhood meeting. Sometimes if it's a really controversial item, a large item, like in this case, I asked the developer to do open houses for it. That actually came from me, not the developer, to do open houses. We did have a neighborhood meeting about Vesper, but we knew it was an important aspect for possible change in Provo. So we asked him to do an open house, which is quite normal if we're doing a big project that we have an open house. And so the developer had held 2 open houses. Again, another chance, informal opportunity for residents to speak to the developer. Because the Planning Commission and City Council meetings are formal, where you only have the 2 minutes to speak, and it's a very formal hearing.
One quick question, Rachel, and this one's actually back for Bill. Bill, in the meeting that you mentioned, the CRC meetings that happen on Wednesdays, are those open to the public, or are they, how can the public engage or not engage with those meetings?
That's a tricky question. The reason it's tricky is because sometimes developers will want to come in and meet with us about a project they're contemplating that they don't want other developers knowing about and then competing with them for that piece of property. So sometimes they'll meet with us and they'll say, please keep this confidential because, we don't want word getting out on this yet. And it's just a CRC meeting where they're getting input from staff. Nothing has been submitted to the city. There's been no application. In those cases, we try to be sensitive to what their desires are. I understand they're wanting to be protective of the project they're contemplating. But most projects, most things that come before us in CRC, the public could sit in on and watch the meeting. Representatives of the mayor's office come in frequently just to sit there and watch the discussion going on. People from other departments sometimes will come in. But that's the only time there's a qualification where a developer might not want the public to just know about something that they're thinking about doing.
Thank you. Sorry, Rachel, back to you.
Oh, no problem. And I also wanted to say, just like sometimes developers go to CRC meetings before they even apply, just to kind of get a feel for it, we'll also have developers come to the neighborhood district meetings before they've put in any type of application. Sometimes before they've even purchased the land or done anything, they will come to a neighbor just to get the feel of the neighborhood. They're like, I don't want to spend money on this project. How do you feel about having a bakery in your neighborhood? So like that. And then they get feedback from the residents and they're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll change my mind on that. So it's quite normal for, and a lot of times it is just, sometimes it's the developer, sometimes it's just a homeowner wanting to get feedback from the public.
I'd like to just add something to what Rachel has said. if you really want to have input, in my opinion, if you want to have the most input in the process, send your comments to the Planning Commission and City Council ahead of time so they can read and think about it. To me, it's much more meaningful to them if they've had the chance to actually think about what you're telling them. It's hard to hear that input in a public meeting and figure out how you feel about that as a planning commissioner right there on the spot. In the case of Vesper, we had over 100 pages of citizen input, not 100 citizen comments, 100 pages of citizen comment that went to the Planning Commission prior to the meeting. And I think you could tell from their deliberations between stuff they had already read or comments that were made in the meeting, I felt like they tried to wade through the issues as best they could. I don't know if you felt that way, but that was my observation.
Right, definitely, yes. And yeah, usually the sooner you can get it in, the better. And especially if you have a lot to say, if you have a lot of details, stuff like that, you're not going to be able to say that in your 2 minutes that you have. And do know that for our neighborhood district meetings, those meetings are recorded, transcripts are made, minutes are made, and that information is then sent. The resident feedback is then sent to the city council, the planning commission, city planners, the developer. And so so they know, and this is early in the process, they already are getting that feedback before it's going to planning commission or city council.
Rachel?
And the city council also receives from the planning commission a report of action from the planning commission meeting, which is a summary of what the planning commission did and why they came to the decisions they did. It includes all of the citizen input. It includes the development agreement, if there is one. All of that is put into a packet, and all that goes to the city council as part of their consideration for when they hear the meeting, when they hear that item.
One quick follow-up question. Thank you so much for describing the process so completely and highlighting all of the ways that citizens can engage. When it comes to the process, as we're trying to kind of follow it in real time with the Vesper project, John had a question that has been curious, I think, to a lot of people. He said, under what circumstances might the neighborhood meeting on a significant and complex development be circumvented? And I think, there have been a lot of questions about this earlier in the process with Vesper because it seemed like there was a neighborhood meeting that got called really, really quickly to try and get in front of a planning commission hearing that seemed to be going really, really quickly in front of a city council date that has now been delayed, but at the time felt pretty quick. Can you kind of give us some insight into what would kind of, Bill, you had said a minute ago that sometimes these things have been deliberated for 6 months before they ever get in front of planning commission. So what circumstances would cause something to go faster than this, or to maybe, have the process seem a little bit different?
I'll just
Sorry.
say for the neighborhood meetings, they are scheduled a year in advance and they're held quarterly. And so in this case with Vesper, the North District had just had their neighborhood meeting when they got notice that this was going on. And so our concern was our next meeting wasn't until 3 months in the future. And we wanted to make sure that we got ahead of planning commission and city council. And so we had a special neighborhood meeting and then asked them to, when things got delayed, we then asked for them to do 2 open houses. So again, people could do it. So there are ways where we can do kind of an unscheduled special meeting if that's what the neighborhood representatives want.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I feel like Rachel and Bill, have you guys made it through the material you wanted to share tonight? Is it time to open for questions?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay, cool. I'm going to kind of go through the questions that have been submitted on the chat. For anybody who'd like to unmute and ask your question yourself, I'd ask you to be planning to ask 1 question at a time. So if you have a list of 10 questions you want to ask, maybe get them in the chat and we can try and review them, and maybe we can ask for us to follow up with posting answers to people's questions that maybe we don't make it to tonight. We're happy to help facilitate some of that. But if you come off of mute and you want to ask your question, please try and keep that to one question just so that people have an opportunity to do that. If you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, you can do that with the React button that's in the Zoom meeting. If you're able to raise your hand, then I can try and kind of make it through the folks who've got their hands raised to ask your own question. While we're waiting for people to raise their hand, if they'd like to come off mute and ask their own question, I'll just come back to some of the questions that have been asked so far in the chat that we may not have gotten to. And I apologize if I miss anyone's question, please repost it or raise your hand. But I'll do my best to make sure we get through these. One question that was here earlier, how does enforcement of the development agreement work, and who is actually monitoring the development agreement to make sure that it's honored?
So typically the project planner is kind of the point to make sure it's honored. The project planner goes out and does periodic inspections even after it's under construction. And the project planner has to sign off on the certificate of occupancy once the building is completed. So the project planner will go out and make sure all the parking has been installed the way it was supposed to, and that the bike racks are where they are, and just all the things that are in the development agreement or on the project plan have been actually constructed the way they're supposed to. So the kind of the point of contact to do that is the project planner. But we also work very closely with the attorney's office in enforcing on the development agreement. Ultimately, if it's violated, it's up to the city to then pursue court action. It's rare for us to get to that point. Usually if we go to the developer and say, hey, there's a problem here, you're not filling the development agreement, they take corrective action. But the enforcement mechanism is the court.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, another question kind of related to that. This person's asking if let's say that a developer actually changed their project after the initial development agreement was complete and has already been issued a certificate of occupancy. If they added additional facilities or whatever that fit into those zoning guidelines, is that okay as long as they're still within the zoning guidelines, or would they have to put in a new application? What is the ability to kind of monitor it after the initial project's complete?
So there is some flexibility in following the underlying zone. Yes, that's true. But because the concept plan has been attached to the development agreement, and the concept plan shows where everything's going and what is going where, there's not very much opportunity to deviate from that. Again, that goes back to that material change or significant change that we were talking about earlier. You can't deviate very far from that without violating the development agreement, because the concept plan is an exhibit in the development agreement.
That makes sense. Okay. So if they wanted to make a material change, they would have to put forward a new plan, essentially.
They'd have to go back to the city council and request a change to the development agreement, and that would prompt a public hearing. City council has to take a vote on that in a public hearing, and the public would be notified.
That makes sense. Okay. We're going to go on to kind of some of the zoning questions. This one is related to the open space preservation and recreation zone. And it's when a city, if you already have that zone in place, the OSPR in place, if a city later considers a development agreement that involves an area that is under OSPR, how do you ensure that the new proposal remains consistent with the preservation goals that were established by the initial ordinance? Or yeah, the initial zone.
Well, that initial zone doesn't allow much in the way of development at all, that OSPR zone. So there would have to be a zone change or something that would allow something different than the OSPR. One thing people should probably understand about that OSPR zone is that's also what's put on property initially when it gets annexed to into the city. And it's pretty widely recognized that when it's annexed and zoned that way, that's intended to be a holding zone up until the point where the developer comes forward with the zone change application and the concept plan application and a development agreement to change that OSPR zone to something else. The big residential development that just got approved on the hillside. That got annexed as an OSPR zone. Now it just went through a zone change process to allow houses to be built. So the OSPR zone doesn't always mean it's going to be open space perpetually. Sometimes it's intended to be that way. Sometimes it's intended to be a holding zone.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. So that's a good clarification. Um, when you're looking at, I'm going to go down. I think this one's particularly interesting just because of the nature of the Vesper project that we're talking about. It is a different project, right? It's big, it's complex. And so I think this question is really interesting. Do you guys think of a project stop being a Provo project and becoming more of a regional project?
That's a really good question. To us, it has regional significance depending on its intended target audience or the intended users. All of the SC3 zones in the city, which is our regional shopping zone, even though most of those are well within the city, they have regional significance because we expect them to be a regional draw, like Riverwoods, like the Town Center Mall. Even though those aren't necessarily on the border of the city, they have regional significance, so they're zoned SC3. So a lot of it depends on the market it's trying to serve.
Okay. One more question here. Um, who makes the decisions for how much the plot of land that the city owns is sold for? I think this comes down to, with the current Vesper project, there's city land there that's being identified for inclusion in the project. How do we decide what the value of that land is?
Good question. So there are city ordinances that are really strict has rules on all of those types of things for sale of city land. If it appears the property will be over $1 million, by ordinance, there has to be a second appraisal. So there's an appraisal that actually establishes the value. In case of Vesper, there's been 2 appraisals done. But the city staff never decides what a property's worth. We have to get an appraisal, at least one appraisal done. And in those cases where it's a big parcel or valuable parcel, we have to get 2 done.
Thank you.
That's all handled by Tara Riddle, who's the city's property manager.
Thank you. I think this one's a good question because it helps us understand kind of like the order of things. So this question says, in what situations has a zone change been requested before detailed project plans are available? Is that a common order of operations?
Yeah, that's very common because the project plan is going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And most developers are simply asking, can't I at least find out if I'm going to get this zone change before you make me spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to roll the dice, essentially, on a zone change? And personally, I think that's a pretty reasonable request for people to ask. If we required people to have project plan level details at the zone change stage, it would have a extreme chilling effect on the market and getting new projects to come in, which means we'd have less commercial getting built, we'd have fewer houses getting built. Now, maybe you think those would be good things, but the city depends on growth. Okay, a city that stops growing is a disadvantaged city in a lot of ways. So that's why it's handled the way it is.
Okay, so in order for, I think if I restate this, the developer needs to have some assurance that their investment in creating these more extensive plans and going through more extensive research, if they have the assurance that they could get a zone change once all of their plans their plans are reviewed, they've done the research, like for instance, traffic studies and those kinds of things, then they're going to be more interested in developing in Provo. So that's kind of the reason that this process could go in this direction. And we don't want to put too many roadblocks in the way of the concept. Is that?
Yes, the general plan amendment and the zone change are still very high level. The developer or the property owner simply saying, city council, are you comfortable with an amphitheater going on this piece of property. Now, because of all of the implications of that and the location of this, that leads into a lot of questions that I can totally understand, the public wanting answers to those things. And the city council's been asking a lot of questions since the planning commission meeting. And I think that's part of the reason for the delays in it going before the city council, the developers trying to get answers to those things, provide answers to all the questions being asked. So on one hand, where it is high level at general plan amendment and zone change, I understand that in this case, it leads to deep water really quickly. And I can understand the public's discomfort with that deep water. I get it. This is a unique situation.
And I think if I could restate again, it's really the balance then sits with the city council to make a decision on whether or not they want to encourage development exploration for a development like this, even if residents are uncomfortable, or for them to take into consideration maybe what they're hearing from residents about residents not
Right.
being comfortable with them making that concession. So
Yes.
it seems like the balance or the check there, it sits with city council to determine kind of the risk that they're willing to take on the project. So I guess if we want, the developer to have assurance up to a certain point, they have that right to ask. And on the other flip side of this, the public has the right to ask the city council from their perspective of whichever way they want it to go.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering these questions. We promise to kind of keep everybody till 7:45 and try and kind of wrap up here before the end of the hour. Really appreciate Bill and Rachel for your willingness to jump in here. We are going to take the recording from tonight's meeting and post it to our website. As soon as we've got that recording up, we're happy to share it on our social channels just to give people the notification that it's out there. I will also take the list of questions that's been put into the chat. There's some really smart, good questions that have been posted here that we could probably spend another hour talking through, but we've promised to only keep you till now, so we won't. But we'll send those by email over to Rachel and Bill and see if there's potentially some ability to get more answers and post those to our website as we can. We really appreciate everybody's time tonight, including Rachel and Bill's, but also everybody who took an hour out of their Monday night to come and learn more about this public process. I hope everybody's learned some things. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate your openness and willingness to come and share and to get the people of Provo more involved and understanding what the process is that we need to go through and to understand better.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Everybody, I hope you all have a great evening. We'll get the notifications out on our social as soon as the recording's live. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you all.